decided instead of worrying, it was more important to try to do something about it. That's when I started to learn about disaster readiness. If you think about our area in particular, you would think, well, maybe not much will happen here. That's not necessarily true. We hope it won't happen. It's been quite a while since we've had a Category 3 hurricane, I believe 1938. However, there have been multiple very difficult storms since then. There has been flooding, and any time you lose power, any time the basic services are impacted, it's a problem. And that's about natural disasters. In our area, it's also the possibility of having man-made disasters. We have 2 highways going through town. We have the vulnerability of a railroad station. We have a port. We have proximity to New York City. And as unlikely as it may be, those things could also pose risk with reference to a disaster. Because of those vulnerabilities, I looked into ways that I could personally help solve this problem, be part of the solution, not part of the problem, and I became involved in what's called the Citizen Corps, which is basically a community outreach for citizen emergency preparedness. It's part of a federal initiative. And the mission of the Citizen Corps is to reach out to individuals and families to help them be more disaster prepared, more ready for a major emergency or disaster. It's not, our professionals in our town and certainly in our area are very well prepared. However, each individual also has a role for preparedness, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. First of all, there are certain pamphlets, certain information that I want to tell you about, because this is not going to be enough time for me to really get into depth. One of the things is the town of Fairfield has a trifold pamphlet, and it talks about what you should do in case of an emergency. One of the important things, particularly important in the pamphlet, is it lists some websites for you to refer to, and it also lists the radio and television stations that you might listen to in the event of an emergency. So I really do encourage you to pick this up. Another thing I'd like to refer to is some information put out by the American Red Cross. They also, FEMA and the Red Cross often put things out together. They have multiple pamphlets that tell about different actions that you can take to be ready for an emergency. Again, this is a resource for you. And the last resource I'm going to mention right now is this is a Connecticut guide, which is actually put out by our Department of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. And it again has some very good information in it, and I do suggest that you get hold of this as well. And there are websites for each of these items that you can refer to. There are basically 3 things that you can do as an individual that would help you and your family have a more successful outcome in the event that there were a disaster that hit our area. And these steps I'm going to tell you about are not only steps that are important if there's a hurricane, it's also important if there's any other type of disaster. Once you've gotten these steps done, you are going to be in a position to help yourself and your family. One of the first steps I'd like to point out is you need to talk to your family. You need to get around the table, come up with some scenarios. You might be at work, one spouse might be at work, another might be at home, the kids might be at school. If there's an emergency, how are you going to communicate with each other? You need to find out what plans the school has in place. So if something happened, you would know how to contact your child, what you should and shouldn't do. It's very possible, I've been told by the professionals, that the phone system might not work properly, and certainly in the local context. So it'd be really good if you designated an out-of-state person for everyone to call and say, you know, this is Shirley. Can you please tell Joe when he calls that I'm at the Hi-Ho Motel, and it's away from the shore and I'm okay? Then everyone would know where to meet. And there are other basic steps that should be taken in making a family plan. And I won't go into all of them, but these brochures I mentioned do have the details. But most importantly, sit down with the family, talk about how you're going to communicate. I would say the next step is be informed. And that is where this brochure is important, because it tells you what to listen to. There are various instructions that you might receive on radio stations, TV stations, and you probably already know that we have a reverse 911 system in our town, and should there be an emergency requiring an evacuation or sheltering in place, it's very likely that that would play a role in notifying our community. So be informed and stay informed, and I might add, follow instructions, because that's also very important. A third step is partly what's spread out before me here. I speak to a lot of different groups, and one of the things, the feedback I get is, you know, these are great ideas, we should do this. Well, the problem is no one disagrees that we should take these steps to prepare for an emergency, but people are so busy these days that it's way down on their to-do list. And I want to encourage you to put this higher up on your to-do list by showing you how easy it is to take these steps. I've already talked about sitting down and talking to your family. How hard is that? I've talked about getting the emergency numbers in place. Surely you can do that. And other things listed in there. And this is putting a kit together. There are kind of two concepts with reference to a disaster supply kit. One is you should have enough things sitting someplace at home, so in the event that you are told to shelter in place in an emergency, for there's some reason that you're told you are not to go outside, you have the basic water supplies, food supplies, and you would probably have the other things like medical, medical prescriptions and so on hand at home. So that's almost an easier situation. And again, there's a lot of information available on what you need if you have to shelter in place. If, however, you're told to evacuate, and again, I want to urge you, if you're told to evacuate, evacuate. If you're told for a reason, is to have together some supplies that you can kind of grab and go. It's sometimes referred to as a go kit. In fact, that's what I refer to it as. You can keep it someplace at home, and if you have to get, out of Dodge in a hurry, you grab it and head to the car. Actually, I keep mine in the car, and I've made it relatively small so I can lift it. There are other people who are stronger than I, and they may have a bin full of materials they can just grab and put in the car. Some of the more important things you could probably name for me, but I'll illustrate what I have here. One of the most important things, of course, is a radio. Because how are you going to listen to instructions and what the situation is if you don't have any type of communication? There are multiple kinds you can get. This one actually is a crank radio, and it also has a light feature. Of course, there's the basic trusty old battery-powered radio, and you would need to have some extra batteries for that. Flashlight options. Of course, you need a flashlight if the basic things that we have at home we don't have, like power. You need a flashlight, and this again is a crank flashlight. But if you don't have that, then you need to have the batteries. Another important thing to have is at least a very basic first aid kit. This happens to be one example, but there are multiple examples. In fact, it's probably more bang for the buck if you just make one at home. And you might know specific things that your family needs in an emergency kit. This is small, but you can see this is a can opener, because you're not going to have access to an electric can opener if your power is out. And this is to remind you that you need to have some kind of a stockpile of food. It doesn't need to be fancy. And while I'm talking about food, I should mention the concept of time. What we are told by the professionals is that you should be prepared, you and your family should be prepared to be on your own for up to 72 hours. In fact, there's some recommendations now that even go beyond that. That means you have to have all the basics. And the reason isn't because our professionals aren't prepared, it's because they cannot be every place at one time. So you can do your part by taking care of you and your family, and then maybe look around to see how your neighbors are doing. So again, food, it doesn't have to be fancy. You can have some basic canned goods available, certainly more at home than if you had to fit in a bag. Because they're light, I would put energy bars or something like that in the bag. Of course, you need to have some water, and the recommendations for the amount of water you should have appear in the different brochures there. Now, there's a reason that I have this old blanket here. Because if you are told to evacuate, you might end up in a shelter. and you're not quite sure what the situation is going to be, so if you have a few basic supplies ready to go, that's important. So what I did is got this blanket I don't mind not having around, and I have just basic clothes. Actually, the T-shirt says, "Be worried, don't happy," just to kind of cheer me up in the event that it's a very tragic situation. But these are basics that you need to have if you have to evacuate and perhaps end up in a shelter. This is regular medication, over-the-counter, and then a prescription bottle. Each kit really needs to be personalized to you and to your family. For example, if you have someone in your family or you yourself are on medication, you need to take that into account and either pack a little extra prescription medication in there, and or at the very least, have a list of medications so that should you be in a situation where you're in a Red Cross shelter, for example, and they're assisting you, you're able to give that information to someone, and they will probably be able to get that prescription for you. If you have a baby in the household, for example, that's a whole other set of things. If you yourself are handicapped or know someone else who has a physical or other handicap with some type of special needs, that's something you need to have a bigger discussion about in terms of what you need, and also have that same discussion with your care providers, because they may not be immediately available. And there are a lot of resources to help you with reference to those discussions and preparing. You've had a chance to see the things you need to put in your basic family disaster supply kit. And I hope you can see how easy it is. It's not expensive. It's not time-consuming. And I hope you all do that. For those who want to take it a step further, there is something called CERT, the Community Emergency Response Team. We have a CERT team in Fairfield. In fact, there's over 2,000 CERT members in the state of Connecticut. It's part of a federal and state program. The CERT team trains for over 20 hours in basic things like disaster medical operations, light search and rescue, basic command, roles of command, and so on. And as part of that, they become basically certified in an informal sense to be a volunteer force to be deployed by the town emergency manager in the event of an emergency. As you can see on the table, these are additional supplies. These are supplies that have a different focus. These are more rescue supplies in the event that any deployment would involve that. We have the helmet. We have special tools for turning off gas should that be necessary. In Fairfield, and certainly throughout most of the state, a CERT team would be deployed to support our first responders, and they are kept out of harm's way. But it's really nice to be able to have a force that's already been trained and is familiar with the chain of command to help out. And I really encourage you to get involved in that. There's a manual that goes with the course, which is thick because it covers a lot of material. And we have professionals in each area mentioned who teach the course. If you're interested in becoming part of CERT, which again is taking it one step further, you can contact me, and I would be glad to get you on the list for the next class, which we hope will be in February. Now, you've had an opportunity to learn how simple it is to put together a basic disaster supply kit. You've had an opportunity to see if you want to take it a step further, we have the resources for you to do that, and we are really looking to double our team members within the next year. There's one more thing you can do, and that is consider when you are going to give a gift to someone, consider it as part of maybe your disaster preparedness program. You can give someone a gift of a battery-powered radio, a flashlight. There are a lot of basic things you can do to help yourself, give a gift to yourself and your family build a disaster supply kit. Now, if you have any questions about this, I would be more than happy to try to answer them. You can email me, and if I don't have an answer, I will try to get you one.